Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. Welcome back to another episode of The PA is In. Today's guest is going to give us a unique perspective on how we can use our skills and our strengths and our abilities as a clinician to pivot into some very interesting non-clinical work. Dr. Alexandra Howson is going to talk about how using those skills that you use day in and day out as a clinician can be applied to medical writing, specifically medical CME writing, and how she got into this and how she went from OR trauma nurse to academic to someone who is doing full-time CME writing and now helping other clinicians like you to do the same. Without further ado, here she is, Dr. Alexandra Howson. Alex, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Tracy. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm really excited about this conversation. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I am a writer, an educator, and a researcher. I have worked for almost 20 years as an independent freelance writer in continuing medical education. I run a freelance writing business that specializes in CME or continuing education for health professionals. And I also trained as a qualitative researcher. So I bring those skills into the CME space as well. But before that, I was a trauma OR nurse for many years, working in a regional trauma centre in Scotland, and then became an academic at the universities of Edinburgh and Aberdeen as a sociologist. My research was all in the sociology of health, gender and health. And I was an academic for over a decade, but then moved from the UK to the US around about 2004. And at that point, probably experienced a little bit of burnout. The academic system was changing a lot in the UK. We just moved 6,000 miles. I had no network. I tried half-heartedly to look for, an academic job, and then realized, you know what, I probably don't want to do this anymore. So started to really dig into my skills in a way that would allow me to, figure out what other kind of work I could do, especially work that I could do from home, because I had two children. My husband actually traveled for work quite a lot. And so I didn't think I really had the option to commute to work. And we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time, and those commutes are horrible. And that's when I found medical writing. I poked around the internet a lot. I found the American Medical Writers Association, and at that point started to really see that I could align my writing, research, and editing skills and teaching skills into medical writing, specifically continuing medical education, which is a kind of sweet spot for all of those skills. And that's the world I've been in for the last 2 decades.
Amazing. And I just want to highlight to everyone who's listening something really important about what you just said, which was that you were feeling burned out and sort of thinking, I'm going to do what I've always done. I'm going to do this thing that I just left. And you half-heartedly looked for a job in that. So to the person listening who is sort of feeling uninspired or not passionate about the thing that you think you have to do, think about doing something else, because there could be something else that is a really good use of your skills that is completely outside of the box where you see yourself professionally that can add incredible value. So tell us what you're doing now. So you started doing this writing and now you're helping other people also learn to step into this medical CME writing space?
Yeah, so for the last 2.5 years or so, I pivoted my business slightly about 2.5 years ago. I've always been a teacher, teaching others to do the things that I do, but I began to see a gap in the marketplace for training and professional development for medical writers who want to specialize in continuing medical education. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been building up a program that does exactly that. There's a foundational curriculum, there's weekly group coaching, there's a lot of support. It's a beautiful community of like-minded writers who are trying to do the same thing and establish themselves as independent writers with a business that specifically focuses on CME.
Yeah, which I think is oftentimes the missing piece. When a person or a clinician sees someone doing this, they say, I'd like to do that. And then they sort of look around, who's doing what, how can I mimic that? But it's not the same as joining a community, a structured program. Like, here's what you need to do first, here's what you need to do second. That is so powerful, because as an entrepreneur, I know that you can just spend years sort of floundering around without direction and not really making progress, or you can spend money and time to not have to flounder like that and to know the steps and of the proven program that you have done and you've done it and then you've helped other people to do it. I don't need to be Googling it. If I want to do it, I can just learn from you as opposed to trying to get the internet to teach me something.
Yeah, I definitely think it does pay off, regardless of which path you're taking from, established employment into, some kind of freelance world. It definitely helps to have that support from other people, because one of the things that happens is your identity is undergoing a major shift, and your identity is at the core of, your professional identity is often at the core of who you are and how you see yourself in the world and how you think other people see you. And so when you are kind of moving out of that established professional identity, you really do need the support of other people who can prop you up and hold a mirror back to you to show you that what you're doing is legitimate, it's valid, all those things. And your point about having a path is absolutely germane, because in CME there is very little training for writers, or indeed many other people who work in this field. That's one of the reasons I wrote my book in 2024, was to really kind of establish a roadmap for people who want to take this journey.
So we've had guests on the show in the past talk about publishing and writing sort of from a way to build yourself as a subject matter expert, a way to contribute to a body of work. He was saying, that was Harrison Reed, and he was saying PAs in particular are just very underperforming in terms of publication. There's not as many of us in academia. We're not publishing as often. And that there was this sort of responsibility. There was people who were sort of prolifically publishing and people who were, so many more people who were not publishing at all. Can you talk to us about how CME writing is different than submitting an opinion piece to JAPA or doing some research that is then published in one of those journals? How is this different, or is there some overlap?
No, I think it is quite different. There's a whole education planning process behind continuing education content. So anything that you see published or that you participate in as a PA has undergone this planning process that starts with a needs assessment. And that's really a process and a way of documenting what the need is for education. We start by looking at what clinical and performance practice gaps are, that distinction between what is happening in practice and what should be happening according to clinical practice guideline recommendations and other types of expert recommendations. And the needs assessment is actually one place where a lot of writers start off in this field, developing that document, doing the background research to look at what's in the literature, talking to experts to get their perspective on what are they seeing in clinical practice, what needs to change. And then the next part of that planning process is developing the education itself, creating learning objectives that are guided by learning science and adult learning principles, and that are supported by an outcomes framework that is going to measure and assess the extent of learning that hopefully takes place. So writers can be involved in different parts of that process: the needs assessment, creating the content itself, developing learning objectives, developing outcomes assessment questions, and pulling together the different elements that will support the education activity itself. Things like patient cases, things like text blocks to walk the learner through a particular thing that they need to know before they can take the next step in working through a patient case, for instance. So there are lots of different areas where the writer is involved, and that process is driven by. It's usually supported by a team who are all contributing to developing an outline for that content. There's always expert faculty involved. And so there's a lot of teamwork and team communication in order to decide what the content needs to look like. And that is certainly different from creating an opinion piece for a manuscript or for a journal. It has some family resemblance to working on a research project where you likely are part of a team and developing the manuscripts with maybe one or two other writers. But I think the main difference is it's not your voice that you're communicating. You are serving somebody else's voice. And usually that is the voice of the expert, the voice of the guide, not necessarily, for instance, you, Tracy, personally, if you were the expert faculty for a program, more the expert as a concept. Education in the continuing education space is trying to kind of establish the voice of the guide to really support learners through whatever activity it is they're moving through. So you're trying to write in that sort of expert guidance type of voice in a way that's accessible and clear, and definitely not driven by your own perspective on things, because everything has to be thoroughly researched, evidence-based, and absolutely trustworthy.
Yeah, that is so good. And I think everyone listening to this has had experiences where they have attended, read, watched CME that was exceptional and very helpful. And likewise, some that was less clear, less helpful, less like something that you even understand what they're saying or is going to really impact your patient care or clinical practice. So as with all things, there are, really good, resources that people are doing this well, and there are less so. So I think everyone listening is wondering, how can I do this? So I field questions from people all the time who are saying, I want a PRN job. I want to increase my income. I'd like to do it flexibly. I'd like to do it from home. Medical writing, especially in the CME space, does seem to check all of those boxes. And unlike submitting for publication in JAPA, you get paid. I'm assuming you get paid, hopefully you get paid, as opposed to submitting those things. So what does starting and growing a medical writing business actually entail? Should this be people who want to do it full time? Is this something we can do in supplement to our clinical practice? What does that look like?
Yeah, so, continuing medical education is actually one of, let me back up there. I mean, medical writing is a huge umbrella. There's regulatory writing, there's patient education, consumer health, continuing education, of course. Um, I have not worked in these other areas, so I can only really speak to CME and CE. But it is one of the areas within medical writing in general that is very freelance heavy, and so it's absolutely possible to think about moving into continuing education on a part-time basis, or maybe seeing it as a side hustle for a while you kind of scope things out a little bit, test it out, see if it works for you, because a lot of education providers do hire freelance writers, mostly medical education companies. These are companies that specifically focus on accredited continuing education, as well as specialty societies, healthcare associations, maybe hospital and health networks. If you are working as a PA in a hospital and health network, there chances are there's going to be a CME department there. That's maybe a good place to start having conversations with the people who run the department to get a sense of how they go about their education planning, and whether there's potential for you to support them in the work that they're doing. So the first thing is that it's a pretty freelance heavy area. The second thing is I do encourage people to take stock and take inventory of what their current skill set is. Look at what you already do in your work to identify those places and spaces where you create content, whether that content is verbal or written down somewhere. You think about what it takes for you to put that content together. Think about those areas of your work where you are teaching somebody else a procedure, a skill, a way of thinking about something. Look at other areas of your work. Do people ask you to edit those opinion pieces that they're trying to, get published somewhere? Or one of my colleagues worked as a physician for a very long time, and she realized at some point in her career, when she was starting to think about how she was going to transition out of medicine, she realized that her colleagues came to her all the time and asked her to edit their written work. Maybe that's you. So the first thing I recommend is that you take some time to really kind of dig into what your skills are. Then the second thing is to do some research around continuing medical education itself. Who are the organizations? Which are the organizations that actually create continuing education in your area? So if you specialize in a particular area, you might go to particular organizations to get your continuing education. Start there. Look at what they are developing. Look at the types of activities they offer, the cadence, the frequency of those activities. Because that can give you a sense of can you align the skills that you have with the type of education that you're seeing out there. You don't need to stick with your own specialty, of course. If you're more of a generalist, then you can cast a wider net. But maybe you also have a preference for particular organizations that you do your CE in. That's a good place to start, just to get a sense of what's out there. And then the third piece is to start having conversations with people in the continuing education world. That could be people in your own organization. That could be people at those organizations that create the CE you participate in. That could be connecting with people on LinkedIn who are in the continuing medical education space. So those are kind of three starting steps, I think, for testing out the water and seeing whether working in this field might be something that interests you, that floats your boat.
Yeah. And this is one of those things that when you start to think about it, so listening to this episode, just becoming aware that someone is writing the CME that you are reading, that someone is writing the CME that you are attending, I have found that when those things happen, I suddenly, like, since we booked this interview, I have seen CME medical writing everywhere. And I had seen it before, but I was just sort of like, it's there. I know it's there. I'm going to read this article. I'm going to do the questions. I'm going to submit for the CME. And then since we booked this and we connected on LinkedIn, I've been thinking, someone wrote this, right? Someone made these questions. Someone wrote this article. Someone made this like very clear for me to understand as someone who's doing a very, tiny subspecialty like adult pneumonia treatment or whatever that topic is. So I often find sometimes just bringing it to the forefront of your mind, when you start to look around, you have on your desk a pile of things filled with CME writing. So look at those. Who publishes them, right? Who is doing, and look at, if do they credit? So is there a byline of an author in this that I could look that person's name up on LinkedIn and connect with them?
Yes, so it's not usually called a byline or authoring in the continuing medical education world, but part of the world that we sort of work in is in the accredited space. Everybody who touches the content has to be identified, and part of that is compliance. Part of that is to demonstrate or to be able to articulate that what your disclosures are around conflicts of interest, and so you have to be named as the writer involved in creating continuing education content. So absolutely, you can find those writers and other people involved in the content. I'll circle back to that in just a minute, and reach out to them on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is still generally a pretty friendly place. People are still generally using it as a professional marketplace. So I definitely encourage that sort of reaching out. People reach out to me all the time, and I will have a conversation with them. I will have a direct message conversation with them. Absolutely. But writing isn't necessarily the only role for PAs in continuing education. One is peer review. Some of your listeners might already be peer reviewers. There are different ways of doing that, but that is certainly a role that a lot of people coming from clinical backgrounds into CME adopt. The other is as a scientific or medical director, where you are more responsible for setting the strategy for the content than developing the content itself. And you might be working with freelance writers and helping them, creating the strategy that they are going to support in the writing that they do. And I would say that, for your listeners, CME writing, any role in CME is well suited for PAs. I think for at least a couple of reasons. One is context. For writers who come into CME who don't have a clinical background, it can be very challenging to understand and fully appreciate what clinical work involves and what healthcare involves and patient care. So, as a PA, you already know that. You know what that real world challenge is of managing patients who are always much more complex than the patients who are involved in clinical trials. That's the first thing. So you really have that sense. I think you have that lived experience of context that is really important. The second is clinical perils. You're working as a PA, then you are every day you're sharing clinical perils with your peers, with your junior colleagues, expert insights, tips, and practical advice, all the things that help to go beyond the text when you are learning how to work as a clinician. These clinical perils, having that habit of thinking in terms of clinical perils is very, very effective and helpful in the CME context. And the third thing is just relevance and practicality. I mean, these are adult learning principles. We all want to engage in education and or training that is relevant to what we're doing right now, and that is practical, and we can apply right now in our practice. And so I think that this is something that PAs probably do without thinking about, And this is why I say it's important to take that time to really dig into your skills, because it's all those things that you do automatically. These are skills, these are learned skills, that it can be really helpful to, inventory and uh, um, articulate.
Hmm. Yeah, I find that as providers, we often think of ourselves in one single lane. I see patients, they tell me what's wrong, I assess them, I diagnose them, I make a recommendation for treatment, they leave and they come back later. However, within that, there is problem solving, there is amazing communication, there is getting them to buy in and be compliant, there's, making sure they follow up, there's communicating with your colleagues, there's time management, there's charting, there's all of these things that we're doing that really, I don't think we see them as skills because we do them every day. So they don't feel like something that, like, oh, I'm skilled in, efficient patient time management. Well, sure I am, because I have to get out on time, right? Like it's not, we don't think of it as a skill. It's just something that we're doing, daily. So it's such an important reminder to sort of think about, what's in your wheelhouse? What are you good at? And as you were saying that earlier, I am the one who edits all of the informed consents for all of the procedures that we do at our office. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just good at finding typos, right? I'm just good at saying like, this doesn't make sense, or something is missing from this, or we need to, make this more clear. And so you said that and I was like, I am the editor in the office, right? I am the one that people, we have this patient education we're going to hand out. Can you check it? That they're coming to me for that. So there's definitely things that the listener excels at that they maybe don't realize is a skill that they have.
Oh, 100%. One of the things that I do with the members in my program is exactly this type of skill identification exercise. And, we're talking about people with, PhDs, MDs, PAs, nurse practitioners, dentists, vets. So heavy duty people, um, who forget, like you just said. They are always surprised when they do their skills inventory. They are always surprised about the range of skills that they actually have. That can be really helpful when they are then thinking about how to craft a unique service proposition, how to market their services to prospective clients in the CME field. So I do think it's a really important exercise, and it's one to do, I don't know, at least a couple of times a year, because you forget.
Are you feeling stuck, burned out, or craving a little more flexibility and financial freedom? You're not alone. So many clinicians feel trapped in the grind, overworked, underpaid, and unsure how to pivot. But here's the truth. Your skills are valuable beyond the clinic. That's why I created the 48 Side Gig Ideas for Healthcare Providers Guide, a free PDF packed with practical, creative, and immediately cash-generating ideas that you can start right now. From telehealth to medical writing and patient advocacy to app development, and even a little note on podcasting, these things aren't fluff. These are real, proven opportunities that other providers are already doing. You don't have to figure it out alone. This guide will help you explore new passions, learn how to make extra money, and make the first step towards multiple income streams and building the life and career you actually want. Download your free copy today at tracybinghamon.com/gig or click the link in the show notes and start creating financial freedom and cash flow flexibility on your own terms. Because you, my friend, are more than just your clinical job, and taking the first step to generating alternative revenue streams is waiting for you inside the Side Gig Guide. Find it now in the show notes. Yeah, it's a good reminder. Even if you're not looking to do a side hustle, it feels good to remember that you are doing all of these things and that you are contributing so profoundly to the care that you're providing to patients. So I do want to circle back because I think that people who are looking for a side hustle, so often they're looking for a side hustle where they do not have to sell something to someone. Talk to me about how pitching yourself to a CME company is similar to and or different than selling essential oils on the internet.
Well, I never sold essential oils on the internet, so I can't speak to that piece. But I never use the word pitch. I see the marketing process as a freelance writer who has built, a business specializing in CME writing as relationship building. One of the people that I worked with for many, many years is Elise Bannon of Marketing Mentor, and she calls this making business friends. And, I was one of these kids. I grew up as an only child, but, so I spent a lot of time on my own. But I'd go to the park and I'd see other kids playing, and I'd go up to them and say, "Hey, my name's Alex. Can I play with you? Do you want to play?" And making business friends is kind of like that. You're looking around, seeing these other kids playing on LinkedIn, and some of them are people that you might want to work with. And so you do a little bit of research about their organization, about the kind of education that they create. You get a sense of what their specialties are. Maybe you get a sense of what their values are. I don't think you always really get that from websites. So many are very generic, but you can get a little sense of that on LinkedIn if you start following them. Following them on LinkedIn, getting a sense of what their values are from conversations or posts that they are having on LinkedIn, and then you can make the decision about, is somebody that I might want to play with, and make that connection. And I think you can do that in a very intentional way, following them first, responding to a couple of their posts, asking for that connection, and then serving them in some way. It's not about pitching yourself. It's about figuring out how you can help them, is the way I see it. That's the relationship building piece, where you are doing the work to figure out what their pain points are, the support they need, and how you can support them. That's a kind of winnable combination, I think, because everyone in this field needs support. Everyone everywhere needs support these days. We are all working too hard, too fast, too much. And anyone who can show up and say, "Hey, I see you, I've got you, I can help you," is going to get a more positive reception than somebody who shows up and is pitching. Nobody wants that. And CME is a very small field. People know each other, and so that relationship building piece is very, very important.
Yeah. I love your heart in the sharing of that. It's just very clear to me that you are not someone who is trying to get as many students in your program as possible so that you can increase your revenue, but rather that you are intentional about getting the right people, the people who are really, wanting to make this change and, really committed to really building a freelance business. That is very clear in the way that you talk about this.
Oh, well, thanks for that. I appreciate. I mean, that is how I built my writing business. Having conversations with people one by one, and it does pay off because, like I said, I'm just going to repeat myself. People want to be supported. They want to know that they're going to work with, and also I think from the writer's perspective, from your listener's perspective, who might be thinking about this, doing this kind of work gives you the opportunity to think very deeply about who you want to work with. It's not just about taking anything that comes along, although sometimes there's a place for that, especially when we're getting started. But it does allow you the opportunity to really kind of look at your values and be very clear about the types of clients you want to support, the type of work that you want to support, in a way that you don't often get the opportunity within healthcare as a practicing clinician. So I think that's something that can be very valuable in this work.
Absolutely, which leads me to my last question and or topic that we're going to cover as a part of today's discussion. And that is how we can be better, more intentional, more strategic about living in alignment with our values and setting goals that, help us to live into those values. So you said earlier that we are all working too hard, too fast, and too much, which is just a quintessential definition of sort of what it feels like to live in this fast-paced, digital, more world. So tell me how you have done that as a part of your life and as a part of growing this business of yours.
Well, it's been a process, and I wouldn't say I've cracked it. Every day is definitely different. I'm very much a home person. I love I love being at home. I love being in my home. I mentioned earlier, I've got a couple of kids who are both adults now, but when they were younger, I I began to see, at first when I started doing freelance work, it was functional. It was a consequence of not wanting to be a full-time academic. But then I began to see the opportunity to to work from home and also build my family in a very intentional way. So that has paid off. My girls and I are very, very close. We talk to each other every day. They're wonderful human beings, and I feel like part of that is because I was able to be around them, and so I'm very, very grateful for that. um, I think other things, in terms of living your values and trying to create a life that works for you through or trying to build a business that works for you. I think that's the way to think about it. Or that's become increasingly important for me to think about it that way, rather than, I mentioned earlier about professional identity. For years and years and years, I saw myself as an academic and then didn't/couldn't get an academic job. And that really cut to the core of my identity and how I saw myself. I'm someone who, when we moved to the US, I carted all my undergraduate notes as well as all my PhD, just in case, as well as all my PhD research. And, you know, I brought all that stuff with me because I couldn't let it go. And I think one of the things that I've learned in running my own business is that you get to make your work for you and support the life that you want to lead, rather than being fully invested in this other thing over here. As an academic, I did eventually shred all those papers, and that was very freeing because it allowed me to fully practice non-attachment and acceptance. That we're all multitudes, right? We're not just one thing. And I think that's one of the challenges of working in an occupation that has a professional tenor to it. It's really easy to only see yourself as that one thing, and we're not. And so running a freelance writing business has allowed me to expand different parts of myself. I'm also a registered yoga teacher. I was able to pursue that whilst running a freelance writing business. So one of the things that it does give you is a sense of a degree of flexibility, but that flexibility is absolutely dependent on discipline. And that is certainly one of my core values, is practicing discipline so that you show up even when things are tricky and you can't quite see what the end point is, which happens a lot in when you're working for yourself. It's very easy to kind of lose sight of the goals that you've created for yourself. And I think in those times, discipline can push you really far. There's nobody else telling you have to get up and do the work. You have to tell yourself.
You know that connection is one of my core values. So when I saw that Sermo created a new space for APPs specifically, I jumped at the chance to join. I joined because it's a space built specifically for PAs and NPs, a community where I could connect with providers who actually get it. I was drawn in by the opportunity to share insights, hear real stories, and honestly, also by the chance to earn a little extra money through surveys. And let me tell you, it's been worth it. In less than a year, I've made over $1,000 just by sharing my expertise in answering surveys. But beyond the income, the biggest value of the Sermo APP community has been realizing that I am not alone. Seeing what others are going through, whether it's burnout, work-life balance struggles, or even clinical challenges, and celebrating their successes. It has made such a difference in how I approach my career. If you're looking for a reliable additional income stream and a vetted community of like-minded providers, Sermo is where you need to be. It's the best place to learn about trends, see how others are doing, and make strong connections. Sign up today using the link in the show notes and join me inside this community of clinicians. And you'll even get a $20 bonus just for joining. Because in medicine, we're stronger together. I feel like as an entrepreneur, something that I have struggled with, and I'm interested to hear your experience with this, is that, have you ever seen those things that say, oh, I didn't want to work for someone else 9 to 5, so now I work for myself 24/7. So now I work. What has your experience been with building boundaries and do you only work inside your office? Do you only work at certain times of the day? How have you done that so that your business doesn't then consume your whole life?
Yeah, so I trained as a nurse I left school and I trained as a nurse. And I think nursing, this is way back in just like 100 years ago, back in the 80s, nursing at that time, definitely part of the training was very much a focus on discipline. And so I think one of the things that gave me was boundaries and the ability to set those boundaries. I think, we talked at the very beginning of our conversation about working in pajamas. That is not something I have ever done because I need those. I need physical boundaries, clothing boundaries, time boundaries, so that I can create a working day for myself. So, right from the get-go, I have pretty much created, at least I have my own home office now, but I didn't in the early days, a space where I could work only on my business. I've always, kind of dressed, put non-sleeping clothes on for work. Although, I've got a pretty casual style, so I'm not gonna. But you've got to do what works for you. That has always worked for me. And then take breaks. I am a huge advocate of taking breaks. My girls will be laughing if they listen to this because they'll say, "Mum, come on, when do you take breaks?" But I think there are lots of different ways to take breaks during the day. Movement snacks, just getting up, going for a walk around the block, doing some downward dogs, whatever um, your body craves, I think is really, really important because the more we move, the better we think. And our bodies are our instruments. We're working at keyboards for long periods of time. We're going to get RSI if we don't, make sure that we take care of our wrists, our fingers, our shoulders, our head, our neck. So creating those, not so much boundaries, but spaces where you can move and breathe and look after yourself and rest are really important, especially for women. What often happens, if you look at the data, what often happens is women get into that peri to postmenopausal journey. And that's the point where they start to question the work that they're currently doing and start thinking about, it's that midlife transition, start thinking about a different way of living, a different way of showing up for themselves and their families and their communities. It's also a time, I have to tell you, this is also a time, you're a clinician when we've got all sorts of hormonal things going on that can present myriad challenges. We need rest, we need support, we need to really nourish ourselves. And so if you are moving into that independent freelance space, you're the one who really needs to take care of the business of taking care of yourself. And so I think that becomes even more important, when you're running your own business. So I get it. It's very hard to say no, especially in the early days when you don't know if you're going to hit your financial goals. You need a certain amount of, maybe you need to replace the revenue you've given up as a salaried employee. And of course, not all revenue is income when you're running a freelance business or any, whether you call yourself an entrepreneur, solopreneur, um, business owner, whatever. And so it's hard to say no, but you have to. And that's where getting clear about what your skills are, the type of work that you want to do, how many hours you can work, before you get tired. Because if you keep pushing through that, it's going to be very difficult to sustain your business over time.
Yeah. My experience has been that in my mind, the number of hours that I can dedicate to business in a week while working clinically, while showing up well for my family, while taking care of myself, is way more than I can actually show up and be a good person and be the person that I want to be, who is healthy and whole and enjoying life. Like I could do so much more, but I wouldn't be in a good place physically, mentally, emotionally. So, I would encourage the person listening to give it a try, but also to be realistic about the time and the energy that you have to dedicate to a new endeavor, because it's like building a house. It always costs more and takes longer, and takes a little bit more time and effort than you think it might to get one of these things off the ground and to have systems that work. It is a lot that you don't see of other people who are like, I just landed my 10th, well, yeah, they did. But before that, they had a lot of work and a lot of conversations and a lot of failures before they got to that point.
Yeah, I think that's really a really important point. I think the other thing that goes with that is you do see a lot of chit chat, even on LinkedIn, especially from, I would say, Gen Z folks, about this twin um, uh, set of characteristics, flexibility and freedom, and the idea that you can very easily get to, six-figure revenue. And I think that is definitely the case. But the work that it takes to get there, excuse me one moment, the work that it takes to get there can really be detrimental to your overall health and well-being. So I think one of the things that it's really important to do at the beginning and at periods throughout your as you're growing your business is to get very, very granular and specific about what you need your revenue to be, because that will help to determine how many hours you will need to work. And when you see that figure, you might then sort of dial back on the amount of revenue that you need to generate for your business. Now, that's going to vary household to household depending on what the overall kind of income is, but it's an important piece that a lot of us don't do in the very early days. But it can help you set that calibration of, okay, I don't need to work, I don't know, 30, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I can actually do paid work for 25 hours a week. There's always going to be other work that is not paid, because it's the marketing and the process development and all the rest of it. But I think that's a piece that's worthwhile paying some attention to, just so that you get that sense of comfort that, okay, I don't have to be working 60 hours a week to earn what I need to earn to contribute to my family, my household, or so on and so on.
Yeah, I have an entrepreneur that I follow who calls that the enough point, which is something that we can all think about in terms of like, what is enough, and which is, very practical in terms of what is enough this month. And then also like, what is enough, right? What is enough in terms of the contribution that I'm making, in terms of the time that I'm dedicating, in terms of, the way that I'm contributing financially. That question is sort of very open-ended, but if we're thinking about it in this terms, what is enough for this month? What is enough monthly for this year, to make this a worthwhile endeavor, a productive, so I don't feel more burned out and resentful that I'm committing time to this, that it really is, moving the needle in that way. So this has been such a great conversation. I feel like there's some really great nuggets in here for people who are listening to sort of connect with and tease out and apply to their own lives. So to the person who is saying, I would like to enroll, I would like to become a CME writer, where can they go to connect and learn more from you?
Oh, my website is alexhowson.com. I actually have a quiz there where you can start to do that skills inventory business from the get-go. I'm on LinkedIn. Please connect with me. I love to have conversations with people who are thinking about, moving into medical writing or thinking about how to have a kind of non-clinical career shift for sure. And yeah, those are the main places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your advice and knowledge and wisdom of this very niche, very cool part of being, a clinician and doing some medical writing in that CME space. So we really appreciate you coming on and giving us the time.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation, Tracy. I appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Oh my goodness. Count me in for any conversation that reminds us that these core values, these things that we deeply, truly care about, that are at the center of our lives, deserve to stay at the center of our lives. And instead of doing things and building things that take us away from those zones of genius, that take us out of those things that we adore doing, how can we build a life that focuses on those values and brings us closer to them and living in alignment with the things that we really enjoy? Every so often, there's a guest that just reminds me that they are just doing these great things with a wonderful heart for very, very good reasons. So thank you, as always, for choosing to spend your time with us and for tuning in to another episode of The PA is In. If this helped you, if you have a friend who's been thinking about making a pivot and you think that they may be great at CME medical writing, send them this episode and tell them, hey, I listened to this and it made me think of you. That's all for today. This PA is out. Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.